Brad. This is your place to explore faith, life, and everything in between. Text in your thoughts on today's conversation on 04888 185 00. Now, get ready to join the conversation right across Australia, right here on Faith FM. Hey, good afternoon, Australia. It's Brad here, and welcome to Conversations. It's awesome to be here with you. I've got Alicia here with me today. How you doing, Alicia?
Hey, yeah, not too bad. Yourself?
Nice. Yeah, look, I was freezing this morning.
And you know what? It was really cold.
Yeah, and I walked down to the shops at one point, and it was sunny, but it was cold. And I was like, oh yeah, this is all right. Then I walked back out, and it was just dumping down rain and freezing wind, and I was like, oh, this sucks. But I survived somehow. So back here in the studio where it's nice and warm, and happy to be on air and spending time with our friends all around Australia and New Zealand and around the world. I met someone actually this morning who told me that he's from Auckland and he listens to Faith FM on the Faith FM app. Which I thought was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, came out of his way to say g'day and ask a few questions and all that sort of thing. So shout out to Mark. He's probably not listening at the moment because I think he's probably working, but it was nice to meet you. Yeah, well, welcome to Conversations, everybody. If this is the first time you've tuned into Conversations and watched a show, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, or listened to it if you're listening on Faith FM or on one of the podcasts or whatever it might be, we are stoked to have you with us, and we want to invite you to be part of the conversation, which you can do by texting us in on 04888 185 00. You know, the other day, Alicia, I was on a show and I forgot the text in number. I got halfway through it and I forgot like the last 5 numbers. So I was like, this is really bad. Quick, go to a song. But, you know, for our Conversations listeners, you know, like I always make sure.
Spot on.
Got it. Yep. It's buried in there nice and deep. Hey, we actually had an interesting question that came in just before from David, you know, a listener who's getting in early before we've even started the conversation.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be worth actually quickly responding to this because we love getting in Bible questions and all sorts of different bits and pieces here on Conversation. So, Alicia, do you want to read that out and we'll see if we can answer it?
Yeah, I can. Actually, it says, hey, Alicia, Brad, and Robbie, I believe because John the Baptist assisted with essences according to Pastor Milton Mills and didn't eat locust insects, but ate locust plants and wild honey locust plants, according to Pastor Lyle. What are your thoughts?
Oh, okay. That's an interesting question. So it's so what David is asking, if I've got this right, is did John the Baptist, so a fella who was around in the New Testament times, who started basically telling people the Messiah is coming, so get ready. And he would do what was called baptizing people, which was like a symbolic thing representative of God forgiving their sins by dunking them underwater.
Yeah.
So this is the person we're talking about. And David's asking, did John the Baptist, did this guy actually eat grasshoppers or locusts,
yes, I think
as the
that's
Bible
the question.
calls them?
Yeah.
Because I've seen this argument before. There's some people that say, well, you know, you can interpret the Bible word for locust in a slightly different way because the English word locust, I think it comes from the Greek word. Now, let me see if I can remember it. It's acrides or something like that.
Oh, okay.
And it can actually refer to both like the insect, so the locust or the grasshopper, what do you want to call it? And it can also refer to certain types of plants. And in this case, some people have interpreted it to say, well, maybe it refers to the locust plant. And I don't know if you've ever seen a locust. Maybe you've seen locust roots before.
I think I've seen the roots, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes people like turn them into chips and all sorts of, and they've got funny shaped holes in them.
All over them, yeah.
They look kind of weird. And so some people are saying, well, you know, like because it could potentially refer to these things, what did John the Baptist actually eat? And I'm not going to claim to be the, the sole source of truth here. But I think where you can turn to actually get a bit of an understanding on this is the book of Leviticus. And if you go to Leviticus chapter 11, and I'll have to have a quick dig and remember which verse it is, but there are actually some instructions that God had initially given the Israelites through Moses about what sort of foods were clean or unclean. And, when we're talking about clean or unclean, the Israelites had a very interesting perception of clean versus unclean food. Because it was kind of this idea of saying, if something is classified as clean, then it is technically food. But if something is classified as unclean, it's not, in their mind, it's not actually food. So it's saying, it's like dirt. So if this food is unclean, I mean, you can eat it, but it's not food, right?
Yeah.
It's in the same way that, you could eat sand if you want to, but it's not food.
Yeah.
So if you want to go, Alicia, to Leviticus chapter 11, and I think it's verse 22 or something like that, if you want to read that one for us.
Verse 22. It says, of these you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper. And verse 23, but all other flying insects that have 4 legs you are to regard as unclean.
Okay, so there you go. So in terms of, did John the Baptist eat locusts? Well, in terms of Jewish practice and Levitical law and God's own instructions, yes, he technically could have eaten them.
Could have, yeah.
And the interesting thing is, from what I understand, in the New Testament, in the Greek literature, basically, the word akrides, so the Greek word that, can mean locust, or it could potentially mean a certain type of plant. From what I understand, in the New Testament, that word is nearly always, in fact, I think it's pretty much always used to refer to the insect and not necessarily to the plant. So, so there you go. So there's an answer. Now, I don't pretend that it's, the definitive truth or anything like that. But, it would certainly make sense that, if it says, well, he ate locusts, it's not as if that's some sort of weird thing. And, even today, people in the Middle East do eat grasshoppers.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Cool.
That's an answer to that question, and hopefully it's an interesting answer, David. And, and again, it's, to me, it's not the end of the world, but I look at it and I go, well, here's John the Baptist, and what he is doing is something that would make sense for him as a Jew, as someone who is a prophet and a follower of God. He would look at those instructions and say, well, okay, locusts, well, yeah, that's an appropriate food because God has said that it's clean, so therefore it is food. And it's not food. Dirt. Yeah, that's right. So, thanks for texting in that question, David. That's an interesting one. And funnily enough, the theme of what we're going to be talking about on Conversations today is unexpected surprises.
Ooh.
And we started off the show with a bit of an unexpected surprise and a bit of a curveball question. But, I love surprises. I don't know about you, Alicia, if you're a big surprise person.
I think it depends.
Okay.
I do it and then I don't.
Yep.
The surprises that I don't have to prepare anything for is fine. But surprises where it's throws off my plans, or I'm not prepared for, or means I have to now do something to cater to that particular surprise. It's not. That's just not me. Like this morning, for example, I woke up and my face is really it's like this side, the left side of my face is a bit swollen and puffy and stuff. It's not sore, it's just swollen. And then I'm like, I've got the show today, I have to go on. And I was talking to Austin, my partner, about it, and I was like, I don't think I can do it because look at my eye, look at my face. And he was just like, I don't think that's why you're on there. So people can tell. I'm like,
yeah, well, that's true.
That's a good point. So, but that was a surprise that I did not like.
Yeah, you didn't like it.
That's the kind of surprise I don't like.
Okay. So it's kind of like you don't mind, and this will sound kind of funny, you don't mind an expected surprise. So if someone were to say to you, oh, I've got a surprise for you. Yeah, I'm gonna give you something as a surprise tomorrow. It's like, okay, cool. Yeah, I can manage that. I can kind of plan for it. I can fit it in.
Yeah, kind of.
Whereas it's just like, if something's sprung on you, it's like, I don't know what to do.
I don't know what to do. Yeah. I think
Okay.
that's me.
I get that. Fair enough. I think I'm more of a, I think I'm probably more of like preferring an unexpected surprise.
Oh, okay.
Because if I expect it, then I'll just be thinking about it all the time. And for the person who said, I'm going to give you a surprise, then I'll just be like, I'll just continually guess for like hours and hours. Is it this? Is it this? Is it going to be this? Are we going this place? And then the problem is like, well, do you want me to just tell you? No. I want it to be a surprise, but I want to try and figure it out too.
Yeah.
So, I like surprises and then I don't in a funny way, I suppose, as well. But hey, to everybody who's listening, we want to know, have you had a really memorable surprise before? What's like when I say to you, what's the best surprise you've ever had? Or maybe not even the best surprise. Maybe it was the worst surprise. Like, because a bad surprise can be like, a flat tire. Oh.
Yes, I've experienced that.
Yeah.
And it was
annoying.
It was so bad. And like the front of the car sunk down into the ground.
Yeah.
And I started the car and everything. I was like, what's wrong? Then I went, I was like, oh, no.
No.
See, so that's the kind of surprises I absolutely hate.
Yep, fair enough. And that's generally unexpected. You don't really, no one's going to really rock up to you and be like, by the way, tomorrow, I'm going to put a nail in your tire.
Exactly.
Oh, thank you. Saying, no, I'm going to lock you up in your house so you can't. Ah, boy. Well, actually, I was going to mention one thing that I discovered the other day that was quite surprising to me. Some of our listeners here on Conversations might know that I like making all sorts of strange foods and lots of different, fermented things and interesting things like that. And one of our colleagues here at Faith FM, who, if you've called into the station before or you've texted in for free offers or anything like that, you might have talked to Grace. Grace is one of our listener interactions team here. We love you, Grace. Hope you're doing all right this afternoon. And Grace came up to me and she said, hey, Brad, I've got some sage, like sage, the plant, the herb. Oh, would you like some? And I said, oh, yeah, that'd be good. And I was trying to figure out what can I do with this? Because, sage is nice. You can bake stuff with it, right? You can have it with potatoes or pasta.
I don't think I've ever tasted sage.
Oh, yeah? Well, you should ask Grace. She's got plenty.
I will.
Okay. And so I was trying to figure out what can I do with all this sage? And I figured, maybe what I can do is I can take that and I can take some of the other herbs I've got growing at home, so your basil and oregano and rosemary and all that sort of thing. And I'll take them and I'll dry them out. Okay. And then I'll crush them up, blend them together and make like a herb salt.
Oh, gotcha.
That's something really nice. And you just put it on your food and put it on your veggies when you have it. And herb salts are really good. And then I got thinking, see, this is how my brain works. It's like, this could be interesting. Well, maybe if I do that, then I could try this.
It always goes a step ahead.
Yeah. It's not necessarily a great thing for getting stuff done. But anyway, I'll think about that later. See, now I have another thing to think about later.
Exactly.
But I thought to myself, I wonder what foods have the most magnesium in them. Now, that might sound really random, but I've been talking to a few people recently who've had, stiff muscles and that sort of thing. And magnesium is a nutrient or like an element, a mineral that's really helpful for our body in reducing cramps and muscle stress and all that sort of thing. Okay. And so I thought to myself, all right, I'm going to go and see if I can figure out what food has the most magnesium in it.
Did you find out?
I did. And the answer to me was a massive surprise. But I want to chuck this question out to our listeners and say, what food do you think has the most magnesium in it? Yeah. So we'll go to a song in just a sec, but 0488 185 000. Do you know or do you have an idea of what food you think might have the most magnesium in it? Text in 0488 185 00, and I'm keen to see if anybody gets it right because the answer to me was a massive surprise and something I didn't expect at all.
So I'm interested now.
All right, let's go to a song. We're going to hear now Brian Dirksen with Refiner's Fire. You're listening to Conversations. If you're listening live, it is Wednesday, the 20th of March at 18 past 2. We'll see you back just after this song.
Purify my heart. Let me be as gold and precious silver. Purify my heart. Let me be as gold, pure gold, refiner's fire. My heart's one desire is to be holy, set apart for you, Lord. I choose to be holy, set apart for you, my Master, ready to do your will. Purify my heart, cleanse me from within, and make me holy. Purify my heart, cleanse me from my sin, deep within, refiner's fire. My heart's one desire is to be holy, set apart for you, Lord. I choose to be holy, set apart for you, my Master, ready to do your will, ready to do your will, ready to do your will.
You're listening to Conversations on Faith FM. Text in your thoughts on 04888 185 00. That's 04888 185 00. Hey, welcome back. You just heard there Brian Duxon with Refiner's Fire. Pretty nice song. Hey, before the break, we've been talking a little bit about surprises, and I was sharing with Alicia something about a food that really surprised me. And it was, what food is actually the highest in magnesium? You know, and magnesium is one of those things that's really good for muscle pain, for cramps, for arthritis. You know, if you ever go to a masseuse, sometimes afterwards they might give you some magnesium tablets, or they'll use like a magnesium spray for a massage or something like that. You know, even high-end physios for sport teams will often use like a cream that has a lot of magnesium in it for bruising and muscle pain and that sort of thing for players.
Yep.
So magnesium is a really cool thing, and you do find it in food. But I wanted to throw out the question, what food do you think is the highest in magnesium? And so I'm going to clarify this a little bit, because it's, you know, it's like saying, well, you know, if I eat enough peanuts or something, then technically that's the highest.
Yeah.
So we'll do it in terms of per 100 grams. So let's say you eat 100 grams of a particular food, and you get a certain, you know, maybe you get 500 milligrams of magnesium, or maybe you get 1,000 milligrams of magnesium, or maybe you get none. So I saw Ronald from New Zealand. Hey, mate, he said pumpkin seeds. Okay, pumpkin seeds are pretty good, actually. And when it comes to nuts and seeds and that sort of thing, I'm pretty sure you're on the money that when it comes to nuts and seeds, pumpkin seeds do have the most magnesium. So that's pretty good.
Oh, wow.
But it's not actually the food that has the most magnesium. So there been any other entries on the text line?
Yeah, Duncan and also Leanne mentioned pumpkin seeds.
Yep.
They also said, I know nuts and seeds are a good source of magnesium. And Duncan also said cacao.
Oh, yeah, that's not a bad one. That's not a bad one. Well, you're right in that nuts and seeds are pretty good in terms of magnesium. So pumpkin seeds are the best, and then you can have actually watermelon seeds are the next best nut-based source of magnesium.
Wow.
Yeah. And most people just take your watermelon seeds and spit them out.
That's exactly what I do.
Yeah.
Oh, I never knew that.
But then after that, you've got things like sunflower seeds, Brazil nuts, sesame seeds, etc., etc. And these all kind of are in that sort of, apart from pumpkin seeds, they stick out the best. But all the other ones have about, 350 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams you'd eat.
Oh, okay.
And, that might be a bit tricky. But what do you reckon, Alicia? In terms of things that are quite common that people might eat here in Australia, the thing that has the most that we might commonly be able to eat, or at least that people commonly eat, is basil. So if you take basil and you grind it up, it has about 760 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams of basil that you eat.
Okay.
So for those here in Australia who would probably eat basil fairly regularly, you might have it in pasta or something, or in your salads. Basil's pretty good. But there's one thing that actually is the runaway winner by
Trumps
far.
everything.
Yep, absolutely. So, we've talked about pumpkin seeds, so about 500 milligrams per 100 grams in terms of magnesium. Basil is 760 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams of basil that you eat. And the winner by far with 3,000 milligrams of magnesium. Yep.
Oh, wow.
Per 100 grams you eat is actually a type of seaweed.
That's crazy.
And seaweed's not something that, here in Australia we actually eat that commonly. But seaweeds are a particular type of seaweed called sea lettuce. And maybe you've seen this if you've gone for a walk at the beach before, maybe like around some rock pools at low tide.
Yeah.
Sea lettuce is that type of seaweed that's like a bright green and it's kind of thin and almost a little bit translucent, like you can see through it.
Yeah.
But sea lettuce is actually the food that's the highest source of magnesium.
Wow.
And the next runner-up is also a type of seaweed. And the third runner-up is also a type of seaweed. And the fourth runner-up is also a type of seaweed. The fifth runner-up is a type of seaweed.
So seaweed is pretty good.
Seaweed is actually pretty good.
No way.
And
have you ever tried it?
I have.
Any type of seaweed?
Yeah, I've tried a few types of seaweed. Obviously, if you eat Japanese food, like if you eat sushi, for example,
yes.
You often get like nori is the type of.
Wait, I know. I think I've had nori before.
Yeah, so that's typically the one that they'll use to wrap like your sushi roll in.
Yes.
But there's stacks of other different types of seaweed you can get. The more common ones you might know of would be kelp, for example.
Oh, yes.
So kelp is really rich in vitamin D and in iodine. So it's actually like the best plant-based source or any sort of source of iodine, which is really important. Iodine is actually really important for reducing your risk of cancer. And hence why when you actually look at Japanese people who eat a lot of seaweed in their diet, a lot of kelp, they actually have a lot lower cancer rates than pretty much the rest of the world.
Wow.
So seaweed is actually something that's really good for you. And I took that and I went, wow, I didn't expect that at all. That's a complete surprise. All the foods that I thought were pretty good are actually way down the list.
I know, yeah. And David also just texted and said spinach and black beans.
Ooh,
and vegan dark chocolate.
Yes. So dark chocolate, yep. And a lot of green vegetables as well, are quite good for magnesium, which makes sense in a sense because most of your types of seaweed are technically dark
Green.
vegetables in a funny way.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying everybody should rush out to the beach and start picking lettuce and picking your seaweed
all the
and putting it
seaweed.
on your plate. I don't know if it'll taste very good, but there's definitely resources out there that you can look into as to what sorts of seaweed are edible and, how you can prepare them and what you could eat them with. Maybe just go to a Japanese restaurant sometime and say, okay, how are they using different types of seaweed? Hey, what type of seaweed's that? What's in this soup? What's in this sushi roll,
Yeah.
And when you actually start looking at some of these different types of seaweed, it turns out that seaweed is actually one of the most nutritious foods by far in terms of pretty much all sorts of vitamins and minerals. So when it comes to, I think it was vitamin K, which is really important for bone health. Making sure that your bones can actually absorb calcium and vitamin D. It's seaweed, again, that has the most. When it comes to vitamin C, it's seaweed. When it comes to this, when it comes to that, it's seaweed, seaweed, seaweed. So for me, that was actually a really unexpected surprise and not necessarily a tangent that I thought I would get onto when I started going, I wonder if I can make a herb salt. So, yeah, there you go. To our listeners, seaweed is actually something that's pretty good for you. So, yeah, feel free to do some exploring. In fact, what I might share with you is a website that I use all the time for actually looking at different types of food and trying to understand, so what sort of foods are good for me when I'm trying to get, more vitamins, more minerals into your diet. It's a website that's called Whole Food Catalog. And you can go into that and you can, it's got all sorts of different categories for things like cereals, potatoes, nuts and seeds, fruits, vegetables, eggs, milk, et cetera, all sorts of just different types of food. And you can click on all of them and you can actually see how much of the different vitamins and minerals are actually in them. It's a really useful resource. And equally, especially if you want to understand what sort of nutrients and minerals are actually in those foods. And you can look through all sorts of things. You can look at potassium, you can look at calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, iron. What do you think is the food that actually has the most iron? There's an interesting one.
I'm going to just say spinach.
Yeah. So spinach is the classic.
I feel like it's the classic.
Yeah, that's what most people think. But the food that actually has the most iron in it, naturally, is basil.
What?
Yeah. Who would have thought?
Wow.
And it turns out, because I looked at that at first, I was like, what? No, it's got to be spinach. But the whole deal with spinach was there was some research done for spinach and the amount of iron in it back in the 1960s, I think it was. And they accidentally moved the decimal place.
No way.
In terms of how much iron was in spinach. And so instead of saying, 50 milligrams per 100 grams of spinach, they'd accidentally moved it to like 500 or something like that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if those are the exact numbers, but that's an example of what had happened. And so for a long time, people thought, spinach is the best. And if you need more iron, you just got to eat more spinach. And it turns out that wasn't actually the case. So there you go. Funny thing. So if you want more iron in your diet, you can eat basil, you could eat thyme, or you could eat, surprise, another type of seaweed.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So, it just keeps coming through, this whole seaweed thing.
Yeah.
But maybe what I'll do after the break, when we're on our next song break, I'll chuck a link to this in our into a text offer. And then people listening can text in this and they can go to this website and they can actually start looking at what are the foods that I eat. And, if I'm wanting to be healthier, maybe I could try eating a bit of seaweed. Like even just at Coles or Woolworths, you can get dried seaweed.
Yeah, you can.
Start incorporating that a bit into your diet. Or maybe things like, if I'm deficient in iron, which is certainly a problem for a lot of women, maybe I can start growing some basil at home and adding that to my salads or pastas. Because basil's pretty easy to grow. You just put it in the ground and it grows like crazy. Yeah. And one of the cool things with basil as well is bugs don't like to eat it.
Oh, okay.
Because it has a really strong smell. Like basil oil is something that repels insects, it repels bacteria, all sorts of things.
Wow.
And so another thing, like you can actually plant basil with other plants that are more susceptible to pests, and it'll kind of deter those pests from eating your other plants.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, it's a very interesting thing, like this whole world of plants and different things you can eat, and just so many things that, to me, I just wouldn't expect.
Yeah, me too.
Because when you talk a lot of the time about things like even iron, for example, people will typically say, oh, well, if you need iron and you need magnesium, you need these things, you need to eat your meat. You've got to go and have your red meat. You've got to have your steak.
Yep.
Whereas actually it turns out that it's other things that you wouldn't really expect that are actually a lot more rich in these vitamins and minerals that we need.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show, like, sometimes you shouldn't take things at face value and just go, oh, just because I've heard it a million times, maybe that's not actually the case. Maybe you do a bit of digging and you start to go, and, for us, like, I think there's some reasonable evidence to say that the Bible supports a diet that does actually have a lot of plant-based food in it.
Yep.
These days we have all these discussions about should we or shouldn't we eat meat, or, et cetera, et cetera. Is meat good for you? Is meat bad for you? The discussion we don't tend to have is going, wow, vegetables are actually really awesome.
Really good for you.
And herbs are actually really good. And, even things like, wow, you can actually eat seaweed and it's actually really good for you?
Yeah.
I didn't expect that. So stick around after this next song. I'll share with you a code word and you can go to this website that I use for looking at different types of food
that'd
and
be awesome.
have a bit of a squiz and start to delve into going, oh, okay, well, if I need more of this, then maybe I can start eating these sorts of foods. And I'm not going to be dishing out health advice or anything, but there's definitely established things like saying if you've got tight muscles, you need magnesium. If you want to help your immune system, you need zinc. If you need to help your bones, you need calcium, vitamin D, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm going to share a code word for that just after the break. You're listening to Conversations here on Faith FM. If you're listening live, it's Wednesday, the 20th of March at 2:36 p.m. Melbourne time. Going to hear now Lauren Day with To the Table. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be back just after this song.
Hear the voice of love that's calling. There's a chair that waits for you, and a friend who understands everything you're going through. But you keep standing at a distance in the shadow of your shame. There's a light of hope that's shining. Won't you come and take your place and bring it all to the table? There's nothing he ain't seen before. All your sin, all your sorrow and your sadness, there's a Savior and he calls. Bring it all to the table. He can see the weight you carry, the fear that haunts your heart. Through the cross you've been forgiven, you're accepted as you are. And bring it all to the table. There's nothing he ain't seen before. your trials, all your worries and your burdens. There's a Savior and He calls. Bring it all to the table. You can bring it all. Come on in, take your place. There's no one who's turned away. All you sinners, all you saints, come right in and find your grace. Come on in, take your place. There's no one who's turned away. All you sinners, all you saints, come right in and find your grace and bring it all to the table. There's nothing He ain't seen before. All your sin, all your sorrow and your sadness, there's a Savior and He calls. Bring it all to the table. And He calls. Bring it all to the table.
You're listening to Conversations on Faith FM. That's right, you are listening to Conversations here on Faith FM, whether you're listening live or you're listening to a delayed version of the show or a podcast or whatever it might be. We are stoked to have you here with us today. If you are listening live, it's Wednesday, the 20th of March at 2:40 p.m. here in Melbourne, so it might be a slightly different time where you're listening. But thanks for being part of Conversations. And hey, so far today, we've been talking about surprises. And just before the break, we were talking about, some different surprising foods and, what you actually get from them. And I was sharing a little story about how I discovered that it's actually seaweed, or a particular type of seaweed at least, is the food that has the most magnesium in it. So, maybe if you're someone who suffers from sore muscles or, you get tension headaches in the back of your neck or whatever it might be, and you need a bit more magnesium in your diet, you could actually start thinking about eating a bit more seaweed.
Oh, that's interesting.
Not something I would have expected.
Yeah.
But then again, I guess most of the time we don't really think about what we eat and what's in it.
Yeah, I know I don't, and I know I should. But I'm thinking about seaweed, and the only kind of seaweed I would have is, how you have sushi and it's wrapped up in that seaweed.
Ah, yeah.
And as far as eating goes, that's the only way I know how seaweed is edible.
Yeah. Well, you can use it in soups. Seaweed is actually really good for making soup stocks and that sort of thing. Have you ever tried that?
I've never tried that.
It's actually really nice because, a lot of the time, when you have your vegetable stock cubes or powder or whatever it is, you're trying to give it that kind of rich, kind of savoury, almost a bit of a salty flavour.
Yes, yeah.
And that's exactly the sort of flavour you get from a lot of types of seaweed.
Oh,
because it spends all of its time in salt water in the ocean.
Yeah.
And so, you can go down to the shops and you can basically just buy packets of dried seaweed, especially if you've got an Asian grocer nearby.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of different types and you can try different ones. You can get nice big slices that you can just put in soups and they make a nice flavour. So, definitely worth trying.
Yeah.
There's lots of really neat ones. So if you would like to get a link to the website that I use quite a bit for trying to understand what sort of good stuff is actually in the food that I eat, all you need to do is pull out your phone and I'm going to give you a code word and you can text that in, and once you do that, it's going to send you a link to the website and you can start checking it out and start going, I wonder what food has the most, name your thing, right? What has the most vitamin D?
I'd love to know what vegetable has the most protein.
Okay, well, I can find that out. Give me 1 sec.
Awesome. Because I've always just heard chicken and, meats.
Ah, yeah.
But I'm not sure what veggie has the most protein.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I'll do the code word first and then maybe we can come back to it and then we can figure it out. But if you'd like to check it out, all you need to do is text the code word food.
Easy.
Yeah, a real easy way to do it. text that to our show number, which is 0488 185 00. And it'll send you a link to the website that I use, which is wholefoodcatalog.info.
Okay.
And now keep in mind, when it comes to sometimes things like this, there's also questions about the bioavailability of the actual minerals and stuff in food. So there's lots of different discussions about that happen all around the world all the time.
Yeah.
To actually trying to understand, it's got this much stuff, but, can I actually eat it and do I get it? But you were asking, Alicia, just then, like, what vegetable has the most protein?
Yes.
And that's an interesting question.
And
So
I'm
let
hoping
me-
it's not seaweed because I can't just go
Ah.
like it's something. I'm hoping it's something that I'm already used to
Okay.
because I get quite. I'm quite. I don't know if it's afraid or just like fussy, but when it comes to trying new foods,
Yep.
it's quite terrifying for me. I
Okay.
like I like what I know and what I've had. So
So, two of the foods that are actually so we're talking specifically vegetables here.
okay, yes,
So two of the foods that actually, let's do three foods and three vegetables that are quite high in protein. So one of them is peppers. So
perfect.
that also
yes.
means capsicums, for
Capsicums and stuff.
example.
Okay.
Yep. You've also got edamame, so soybeans.
Oh, okay.
So they're pretty good. And peanuts. Peanuts are actually
Peanuts.
pretty high in protein.
Oh.
And after that, you got things like broad beans and peas and et cetera, and even garlic.
Nice. Okay.
Yep. So when it comes to like vegetables that are high in protein, you got a few good options there.
Awesome. Okay, I'm happy with that because I love capsicums. So
Yeah, nice. Well, there you go. So capsicums are actually pretty good. But if you're a vegetarian, one of the best sources of protein all round, whether you are a meat eater or not, is actually eggs. Eggs are actually one of the best sources of protein that you can come across.
Okay. Yes, I think I've heard that before too.
So, yeah, in a lot of cases, it can be better than a lot of types of meat. Eggs are actually one of those really interesting foods that they've got virtually a really broad spread of all the different types of vitamins and minerals and macro and micronutrients and et cetera. I remember reading a study once and it was talking about brain development, and it was comparing two groups of kids where one of the groups of kids basically they would eat whatever they were normally eating, but one of the groups just added one egg per day to their diet.
Oh, okay.
And these kids grew up to be stronger and smarter and healthier.
Just by adding one egg
Just
per
by
day.
adding one egg.
Oh, wow.
So it's an interesting thing. So if you're interested, have a look at this website and checking out some of the stuff that's on there. Once again, just text the code word food to our show number 0488 185 00 and you can go and check it out. The URL for it is wholefoodcatalog.info. A really interesting website.
Cool.
To do a bit of exploring on, and maybe you'll surprise yourself as well.
Yeah.
When you look at some of the foods you eat and suddenly go, I thought this was good, but it's kind of
got
rubbish.
nothing in it.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, you know what? I think this is one of the first shows where we have two codes. So we have like a pre-code and then we have a code at the end of the show,
We do,
which is
that's
awesome.
right. And so stick around. We'll give away that other code word a little bit later in the show. We love giving stuff away, right?
Yeah.
Another unexpected surprise. 2 code words, one show.
Exactly.
Oh boy, it's great. Yeah, well, the free offer we're going to have for you a little bit later in the show is also related to health. And it's a book, a really great book actually, that's called Fascinating Facts About Health. And if you've enjoyed part of the show that we've talked about health on so far, you'll really like this book. Because it talks about how it's about 3/4 of the diseases that we face today are all related to lifestyle.
Yes.
Yep. So, people say, it's genetics and this and that and the other. But a lot of the time it's things like what we eat.
What you eat.
Do we do any exercise?
Yeah.
Do we get enough sleep, et cetera, et cetera. So in here, there's a lot in this book, Fascinating Facts About Health, a lot of really good biblically based ideas for how you can have a better life and reduce your risk of disease and be healthier. So stick around if you're interested in that. We'll give you the code word for that a bit later in the show today. But given that our theme for today is surprises and unexpected surprises, there's a particular story in the Bible that is full of unexpected surprises. And that is actually the story of a guy whose name was Naaman. Now, maybe you've heard this story before, maybe you haven't. We're going to go through it a little bit today and just explore what goes on in this story and try and understand it a little bit better. But this story is absolutely packed with surprises at every single turn when it comes to the characters in the story and what they do and how they talk and all those sorts of different things. So I thought it could be a fun story for us to look into today, given that we're talking about surprises.
Surprises, yeah.
Cool. So let's go to the book of 2 Kings is where we're going to find this story. And if we go to 2 Kings and chapter 5 is where we find this story of Naaman. And, you know, maybe we can read through it. If we go, let's say, let me see. Let's basically go from, we'll just read the whole thing. So if we go from chapter 5 and we'll go from verse 1 through to verse 19. How does that sound?
Perfect. Cool. So 2 Kings chapter 5 and we're starting at verse 1 and it reads, Now Naaman was a commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, If only my master would see the prophet who was in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means, go. The king of Aram replied, I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. Verse 7, As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, Am I God? Can I kill and bring back life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me? When Elisha the man of God heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went to his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him to say, Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord, his God, wave his hand over my spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all these waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and went off in rage. Naaman's servants went to him and said, My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, you would have done it. Would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, Wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. The prophet answered, As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. If you will not, said Naaman, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also, When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. Go in peace, Elisha said.
Nice. All right, it's an interesting story. Lots of different bits that we're going to unpack after the next break. But I just want you to think about what are some things that might surprise you in this story, even at face value when we haven't even dug into it. Over this next song break, just think about, are there any things in this story that are unexpected? Any things that surprised you or kind of stood out? And we're going to start digging into those after the break and unpack this whole story and see what we can learn from it.
Awesome.
Nice. You're listening to Conversations here on Faith FM. We're going to hear now Evie with Live for Jesus. Remember, you can text in and join the conversation at any time on 04888 185 00. We'll be back in just a minute.
Oh, I want to be remembered as the girl who sang songs for Jesus Christ, who was willing to lay down her life and do His will no matter what the price. Well, I'm singing for the deaf man who can hear about salvation through my song, and I'm singing for the blind man who can see the light in me and come along. Live for Jesus, that's what matters. And when other houses crumble, mine is strong. Live for Jesus, that's what matters. That you see the light in me and come along. La 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 la. There are times when I am tempted to turn off this rugged road I travel on. There are times when I say, Jesus, can't you find another girl to sing your song? Well, I know it's not that I'm the only one who can sing this melody, but He's chosen me to bless me and to lead me into what is best for me. Live for Jesus, that's what matters. And when other houses crumble, mine is strong. Live for Jesus, that's what matters. That you see the light in me and come along. La 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 la. La 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 la. Live for Jesus, that's what matters. And when other houses crumble, mine is strong. Live for Jesus, that's what matters. That you see the light in me and come along. That you see the light in me and come along.
You're listening to Conversations on Faith FM. Text in your thoughts on 04888 185 00. That's 04888 185 00. Hey, welcome back. You just heard the Evie with Live for Jesus from the album Never the Same. We hope you enjoyed that, and we hope you're enjoying Conversations today. We've had lots of texts in talking about the different things that people eat and what they expect about their food and what they didn't expect. And we've seen a few people that have been jumping in and grabbing that link to the website to maybe unpack a bit more about the foods that they eat. And if you're interested in doing that, just text the code word food to our show number 04888 185 00, and you can maybe do some exploration and figure out what foods you eat that have good vitamins and minerals and maybe ones that don't. Who knows? We're talking about surprises here today on Conversations, and at the moment we're actually exploring the story of Naaman. And Alicia shared the story just before we went to the song break earlier, but now we're going to go through it, in a little bit more detail and actually unpack some of the surprises that appear in this story, because there's quite a lot of them. So as we go from near the start, we see this reference to Naaman, and it says he was the commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man. He was highly regarded. And interestingly, it says here, because through him, the Lord had given victory to Aram. Maybe not something we'd expect, right? Because a lot of the time we'd think, no, God only worked through the Israelites.
Yeah.
He only worked through the Jews. He only worked through Elisha. He only worked through, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
But we learn here, and maybe it's a little bit surprising, that God can work through anyone. Maybe not something that we would expect, especially, even today. We might say, God only works through Christians. But maybe God can work through people who don't know him. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Maybe he was working through Naaman for the purpose of teaching the Israelites something. Or maybe God was working through him because this is how God could reach him. I guess the thing that we can learn from that is that God values everybody.
Everyone,
Yep. And, if you're a Christian, we're called to value everybody equally because God loves them as much as he loves us.
Yeah.
And he might be able to work through them in a way that he would struggle to work through us.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because sometimes, I think as Christians, sometimes we put God in a box like how you were saying before, God can only use those who really, believe in him and follow everything he says and kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you know what? Just for our listeners real quick, just a question for you, Brad. When it comes to Naaman, who was he in comparison to the Israelites? So, you were saying, just in case, someone might think that he was always an Israelite or...
Sure, yeah. So he was an Aramaean. So the Aramaeans were basically what we might consider today to be the Syrians.
Oh, I gotcha.
Or at least the people living in Syria. So this was a kingdom that was to the north of modern-day Israel.
Okay.
And basically, these were a group of people that sometimes had alliances with the Israelites. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they fought. Sometimes they fought together. Sometimes they got along. Sometimes they didn't.
Yeah.
Basically the story of most of the countries in the Middle East in that sort of time. But there's definitely historical evidence that the Aramaeans existed. Even today, a city that you might have heard of is Damascus. So that was the capital of Aram.
Oh, okay, cool.
And it was a big, powerful kingdom basically because Damascus was a very central spot where a lot of trade moved through. So a lot of the trade moving from east to west would all pass through Damascus. A lot of the trade passing from, Egypt in the south, going up towards Greece or Turkey or those areas would all pass through Damascus.
Oh,
so because of that trade, it was actually a pretty wealthy kingdom because they could say, all right, well, if you want to come through our city, you got to pay the toll.
X amount,
And, it became a big kingdom. There's definitely historical evidence that this kingdom existed. If you go on Google and you do a search for the Stele of Zakur, it confirms that this particular king that's referenced, I think it said Ben-Hadad II, is who we understand to be the king of Aram at that time.
Oh, okay.
So, in terms of, what was the question again?
Just compared to the Israelites, who was he?
Yeah, so he would not have been a worshipper of the God of the Israelites, of Yahweh.
Yeah.
We see later on in the story that the king, the god that the king of Aram worshipped was called Rimmon. And I won't go into details about, what that practice entailed or anything like that. But a lot of the time, the different gods that were worshipped in the lands around Israel were not particularly nice gods. They would require things like child sacrifice in order to have a good harvest season or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
We see in the story of Elisha, and the prophets of Baal, for example, Baal being another kind of local god in the other kingdoms, that in order to appease Baal, his priests would slash their own wrists.
Oh, wow.
Because it was blood that was needed to appease this god. So anyway, basically that's the sort of kingdom he was from. The Arameans were typically very good fighters.
Okay.
Aram basically, over the years, that whole region eventually became Persia.
Oh, yes.
And it's, I said Syria, but it's also parts of, modern day Iran and things like that. So that's kind of what we're thinking about. Cool. Hopefully that gives a bit of context to what's going on in the story. So basically, the Arameans and the Israelites probably wouldn't have had a lot to do with each other.
Yeah.
They had different gods, different values, probably didn't get along.
Yeah.
Is probably the best way to put it. It says here another interesting thing. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now, that's a really strange thing, right? Because typically someone who had leprosy would be booted out of town. They wouldn't have had any sort of prestigious position or anything like that. So maybe this is a case of when he started out, he was fine, but later on in life, he caught some sort of bacterial disease or whatever it was. The modern idea of what leprosy is a very specific disease.
Yeah.
But back in biblical times, leprosy could refer to a lot of different infectious skin diseases, basically.
Oh, okay.
So, basically the outcome of what it would be was the same. So whether it was modern leprosy, which is nerve degeneration, or whether it was a different type of ancient leprosy that might have had different effects or whatever, Naaman typically, as a leper, would have been booted out of town. He wouldn't have been allowed to be a soldier, let alone commander of the king's armies. He would have been pretty isolated. So it's a very surprising thing that this guy is still the commander of the armies.
Yeah.
So obviously, to me, I would say looking at that, the king must have valued him really highly.
A lot, yeah.
So here is a very influential, prestigious person, basically. And, as we continue on in the story, in verse 2, we see that some bands of raiders from Aram, they go out, they're raiding the Israelites. So obviously, the Arameans and the Israelites aren't getting along if they're attacking each other.
Yep.
And they take captive a little girl, and this little girl is serving Naaman's wife. Okay, sure, that makes sense maybe. The little girl says to Naaman's wife, if only Naaman would go and see the prophet who is in Samaria. So Samaria at that time was part of the kingdom of Israel. And this prophet would heal Naaman of his leprosy. Okay. So normally it would be a very strange thing from people from one religious belief to go, maybe the God of this other religious belief can heal me.
Yeah.
It would be, I don't know, a Buddhist saying, well, I better go and hang out with the Shintoists or something like that. Or a Christian saying, well, maybe the God of a different religion can heal me.
Yeah.
It would be a very strange thing to do, even back in the day. But, maybe at this point Naaman's desperate. I don't know. Maybe he's tried all of his options. It doesn't say. But it says that he went to the king and he told the king what this little girl from Israel had said, which is a pretty surprising thing,
I was going
right?
to say that's quite...
Yeah, you rock up to your boss. By the way, a little girl told me that here's the solution to the big problem that nothing else is fixed.
Exactly.
And what does the king reply?
He's like, okay.
Yeah, he's like, yes, go.
Let's listen to this little girl.
Yeah, that's right. And he even says, all right, I'm going to send a letter to the king of Israel, this guy that we don't even get along with, to say, please heal my boy.
Heal.
Is basically what we're saying. And so, that's a surprise. And so what happens? Naaman leaves. He takes with him 10 talents of gold, 10 talents of silver, which is equivalent to, I think it says about 350 kilos. So today, that's probably worth about $500,000. All right, that's quite a payment. So obviously the king really values Naaman enough that he's providing the money.
He's forking out a lot of money. Yep.
But not just that, he provides 6,000 shekels of gold, Now, that's about 70 kilos of gold.
Oh, wow.
And today, that's worth about $7 million.
Oh, what?
So, this is quite a payment.
Yeah.
It's not
quite
just,
important to the king.
Yeah. And maybe this is a case of the king going, well, I know we've been fighting, but I guess if I send him enough money, then
He might.
water under the bridge and
Yeah,
we'll get along and it'll be okay. But still, that's a lot of money. So obviously the king really values Naaman.
Yeah.
That he's willing to go to his enemies and pay his enemies an extortionate amount of money to help out.
To cure him.
And it says that the letter he sent to the king of Israel said, with this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy.
Wow.
Yep.
Even that's pretty surprising that this king would have so much. Like he doesn't say that you may be able, you might cure him or
hopefully he will.
Yeah. He's
no.
very sure that you're going to cure him.
Yeah, which is pretty unexpected again.
Mm-hmm.
And, this letter rocks up to the king of Israel and he's like, oh, man. It says he tears his robes, which is a sign of distress. And he says, am I God? Can I kill and bring people back to life? It's surely the king of Aram, man, he must just be trying to set me up.
Yeah.
Because, I can't cure leprosy, man. This is all a setup. He's so distressed. He doesn't even think about Elisha. He doesn't mention Elisha or anything like that. We better go to a song, but when we come back, we're going to start even digging in a little bit more as to what's going on in the story. It's certainly surprise after surprise after surprise.
Yeah, for sure.
In what we've seen so far. And there's some other cool surprises that are going to pop up in this story just after the break. And if you're interested in getting a copy of today's free offer, stick around because we're going to give you the code word for that just after the song. So now we're going to hear Aaron Schust with Wondrous Love. You're listening to Conversations here on Faith FM. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a minute's time.
Everyone's falling and everyone's dying and everyone's losing their minds. We need a Savior who's walked in our footsteps, and we need a God on our side. To know why we're tempted, to know why we're tired, to understand suffering and pain, to give us a reason to hope for tomorrow and offer us strength for today. That you would leave your throne and make this world your home, forsaking majesty, embracing mundane and all of its shame. You walked our dusty streets, healing a world in need. You looked into the eyes of sinners like me, setting us free. What wondrous love is this? What wondrous love is this? That you would lay aside your glory for my soul. Enduring agony, you bore the cross for me. Betrayed by those you love, you took all our blame, bearing our pain. What wondrous love is this? What wondrous love is this? That you would lay aside your glory for my soul. What wondrous love is this? rejection, loss, and grief. You loved a world that nailed you to a tree. What wondrous love is this? What wondrous love is this? That you would lay aside your glory for my soul. Oh, what wondrous love is this? What wondrous love is this? That you would lay down your life for my soul. For my soul. For my soul. For my soul.
Hey, welcome back to Conversations here on Faith FM. You just heard there Aaron Schust with Wondrous Love from the album This Is What We Believe. Hey, hope you've been enjoying the conversation today. Alicia's mentioned during the break that we had a couple of texts come in. One was Wayne talking about how magnesium's great and how he learned about some stuff from it on The Breakfast Show. when they were
Yeah,
talking
Jennifer
to Jennifer
Skews.
Skews. Yeah.
And you can go check that out on our programs and podcast tabs on our website as well. And he was mentioning that if you spray it all over your body, that your cells absorb it 100%.
Yes, that's very true. And, you know, we were talking a little bit about this notion of bioavailability in food before. You know, how
Yes.
you might actually eat something that has a lot of iron in it, but your body doesn't absorb much.
Yeah, yeah.
Interestingly, that's where using your skin is actually really good because your skin can absorb certain elements that your stomach can't.
Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah, so there you go. So that's why, using magnesium as a spray that you massage into your skin
Yeah.
can actually do in some, you know, again, it's one of those things. It's different for every person. No
Yeah,
one's
yeah.
exactly the same. But for some people, they'll have a better absorption of magnesium through the skin than they will from taking supplements or eating food.
Wow.
And you mentioned there was another text come in, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, from Chris, and he was just talking about the locust conversation that we're having earlier on. And he was saying it's unlikely that John would live off locusts and honey because they weren't readily available at all times, but more likely that he ate pods of the carob tree, known by legends as St. John's bread.
Okay, interesting. Well, I mean, I've got a carob tree down the back of where I live. I wouldn't envy John the Baptist eating those. They're pretty gross, to be honest. But it's I think that's a good point to make, and it was probably likely that the fact that he would eat locusts and honey was maybe something well known about him. So maybe it was not the entirety of his diet, but it was probably well known enough that people would be like, "Hey, have you heard of John the Baptist? No, who's that? Oh, he's the guy who eats locusts and honey. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I know him. You know, in the same way that we've probably got friends where you go, oh, do you know Tony? No, what about Tony? Oh, he's the guy who pickles mushrooms. Oh, yeah, I know that, Tony. Yeah. So yeah, good point and good questions that people have mentioned there. All right, let's get back into this story here about Naaman. And we're up to the point basically where, you know, Naaman's rocked up to the king of Israel and he's got all this money and the king of Israel is going, oh man, what the heck? What on earth am I supposed to do with this? I can't heal him. You know, surely it's the other king just picking a fight with us. And it turns out, verse 8, Elisha hears about this. And so what does he do? He sends a message to the king and says, what are you panicking for?
What are you doing? Yeah.
Don't get so uptight. Send this guy to me. And it says, then he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. Now, that's an interesting statement as well. Because, you know, a lot of the time in other kingdoms, right, if you had somebody who was a prophet, someone who could deliver messages from God, usually that guy would be hanging out with the king.
Yes.
Because the king would want to, you know, consult regularly about, you know, what does our God want to say? What does he want us to do? But in this case, Elisha's not actually hanging out with the king. He's off living somewhere else.
Living his life.
And I think one of the interesting things we learn about from that is that, when God calls us to do something, when he speaks through us or, whatever it is, he's not necessarily calling us to wealth and riches and an amazing lifestyle and being in the royal palace or anything like that. He can work with us where we are.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean a life of luxury, but it is a good life.
Yeah, for sure. And I like how he says here, so that he knows that there is a prophet in Israel. It's like I sort of picture it as, Naaman standing there, the king's like wilding out, and he's going crazy. Yep. And Naaman, wonder what his thoughts would have been like, oh, did I just come here for nothing? Can no one here heal me? And Elisha's like, no, tell him to come, because there is a prophet here. There is someone that can connect him to God. So I thought that was funny.
Yeah, it is a funny one. So we go on, and it says Elisha sends. So Naaman takes, his horses and his chariots, his big retinue, because, after all, he's the commander of the army. And he goes to Elisha's place. What does Elisha do? He doesn't even bother coming out.
No, he sends someone to tell him.
Yep. So he sends a messenger out. And, if I was Naaman, right, I'd probably be a bit annoyed about that. I'm like, come on, I came all this way with all this money, all these people to see this guy, and he's not even going to come and say hello?
Yeah.
Maybe, and here's the guy who's the commander of an army. If it was most normal people, you'd be like, I should probably be a bit respectful to this guy so he doesn't chop my head off or whatever.
Yeah.
But Elisha, no, he's not doing that. He's not worried. And so now what happens? The servant says, okay, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, and your flesh will be restored and you'll be cleansed. Okay, well, that's a bit unexpected, and we can see why. Naaman says himself, I thought he would come out to me and he would stand and he would call on the name of his God and, wave his hands over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. So obviously that was what he was expecting. So maybe that was the standard practice of
how they would do things.
How they would approach it. But instead, he's saying, go jump in the river, basically. And Naaman says to himself, aren't the rivers from Damascus, where I live, aren't they nicer than this river here? Aren't they cleaner?
Yeah.
I don't want to, why do I have to go in this river?
Yeah.
Surely, if it was just a case of going the river, why couldn't I do it in somewhere else? And it says he turns away and he's mad and he goes off. And that's maybe not unexpected. Maybe that's how we would react.
Yeah. So was the Jordan River, do you know if it was a nice river or like?
So from what I understand, the Jordan River was a sort of river that would flood a lot.
Oh, I gotcha.
And so, if it was flooding or if not, it would constantly be going up or down. And so you typically would have a lot of like mud and
stuff,
and stuff, sticks or whatever, just because of that. If you have a standard river that's just kind of flowing at the same rate all the time, it can be a lot cleaner.
Yeah.
But the Jordan River, because it was basically, it originates in a bunch of mountains towards the top of Israel.
Okay.
And so when you have all the snow melt, it would flood.
Yep.
So anyway, Naaman's servants respond to him in an interesting way. They say, all right, Naaman, surely if this guy had told you to do something amazing, right? Wouldn't you have done it?
Would have done it, yeah.
So he's asking you something that's actually pretty simple. And I mean, what do you got to lose?
Yeah.
Like if you do it and it doesn't work, well, okay, whatever. But if you do it and it does work, you've got not really much to lose and you've got everything to gain.
Yeah.
And so in a sense here, like the way we can actually see it is Naaman decides to obey God. Regardless of whether it was his servants that convinced him to do it or not.
The way he did, yeah.
Yeah. He's actually obeying God by saying, okay, well, Elisha said to do it, so I guess here's what I'll do. Now, what happens, right? So he goes down, goes in the river, and he says he dipped himself in the Jordan. So the first time he probably comes up. No, skin's still the same. Nothing's happened. All right. Number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Surely by number 6, he was probably thinking to himself, well, I don't know, actually. Maybe he was going like, oh, man, this just isn't going to work,
Waste
is
of
it?
time or something.
Yeah. Or maybe he's thinking, well, there's still one more to go. I wonder what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So we don't know exactly. We do know that in Hebrew culture, the number 7 symbolizes completion.
Yeah.
So in this case, you can actually think about it in a sense of saying Naaman had to completely humble himself before God
Yeah.
to be healed. And, when he was healed, he dipped the 7th time, and it says, as the man of God had told him, and his skin, his flesh was restored, and it was like that of a young boy. So basically it's like saying his skin was now perfect.
Flawless. Yeah.
Yep. So when he was healed, he wasn't just restored from the disease. He wasn't just back to where he'd started, but it was better than ever.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that's symbolic of, our life before and after knowing Jesus. Once we come to know Jesus, it's not just that we get back to a point where, oh yeah, things are pretty good. It's like, no, like that relationship with Jesus, that connection with God makes life better than ever.
A lot better. Yeah.
Now, the last little bit of this story I want to quickly look at, because we don't have much time left in the show today, is where Naaman turns around and asks something that's a bit strange in a sense. He goes back to Elisha and he says, it says he stood before him. So obviously, he's showing Elisha, hey, check it out. Look at what happened.
It worked.
And interestingly, it says that, Elisha is obviously there this time because he's standing before him.
Yep.
And he says, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from me. It's like, okay, so here's the payment for what I've done.
Yep.
And Elisha answers and he says, as surely as God lives, who I serve, I won't accept anything. And even though Naaman urged him to take something, he says, no, I don't want it.
Yeah,
there's no payment for this. There's nothing that you can give that would have made you deserve it.
Yeah.
And it's the same parallel you see to Jesus and his death and resurrection for us, paying the price for our sin.
Yeah.
There's nothing we could do to deserve it. $7 million, means nothing to God.
Yeah.
And the one thing that Naaman actually asks for is he says, okay, well, in that case, can I take some dirt home? Can I take some dirt from here? And this is interesting because it kind of symbolizes the way that people in the ancient world thought about gods. And you can see that Naaman doesn't quite get it in a sense, but he's doing what he believes is right.
Yep.
Because people in Old Testament times believed that gods were regional, basically. They had a geography. So like there would be a god of this region and he had power in that region but not anywhere else.
Oh, okay.
And the gods of Egypt had power in Egypt, but they didn't have power in Syria. And the gods in Syria didn't.
Yeah.
And so Naaman here is basically saying, I want to serve your God, but I don't understand how to do it where I live. So can I please do this as the way of, bringing
God with him
back to where I am and where I'm from. And interestingly, Elisha doesn't say, no, you don't have to do that. He says, that's okay. So anyway, look, man, we've run out of time. There's so many more.
That was a surprise.
Yeah, it really was. There's so many more things that we could unpack from this story, right? But one of the things I want to point out is basically something that Jesus actually says, because I think it's the point of this whole story. In Luke 4:27, Jesus refers to Naaman, and he actually says, there were many lepers in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, but none of them were cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. So it just goes to show, it's not a case of being like, oh, because I'm special and just because, I'm a Christian or my parents might be Christian or whatever it is. It's actually the connection with God that matters. And that's what, allowed Naaman to be healed and to be saved. And so the point for us and for everybody listening is that be in a relationship with Jesus. Don't take things for granted. Get to know him. Strive to be in a relationship with him. Get to know him more. Anyway, like I said, surprises. We've definitely surprised ourselves by running out of time. But I want to make sure that we don't give a nasty surprise by not giving away the code word for today's free offer. And today's free offer, we've talked a lot about health and all that sort of thing. And we want to give you a copy of a book that's all about health called Fascinating Facts About Health. If you would like to get a copy of today's free offer, all you need to do is pull out your phone and text today's code word, which is C0320. So C for conversations, 03 because it's March, and 20 because today's the 20th of March. And text that to our show number 0488 185 00. So one more time, that is C0320, and text that to our show number 0488 185 00. Hey, if you're listening live on Wednesday the 20th of March, you've got Looking Up coming up next with Danny and Sharissa. Hope you enjoy that show, and make sure you tune in same time next week for more conversations.
Awesome. Thanks,
See ya.
guys.